I say, as I said in the beginning, if they do not see the use of it, they had much better preserve it. They have no business even to think of destroying it until they have seen the use of it. Chesterton's fence coming up again, right? Oh, I don't see the purposes of family. Family in my own situation is just proven useless. We should destroy the concept of family. Chesterton's fence. The fact that you don't understand it is exactly why you should not want to be destroying it. Hi everyone. So if you're like me, then sometimes it might happen to you where you get interested in a specific idea or concept and then find yourself exploring that idea in various different ways, perhaps listening to podcasts or watching videos on the topic. And for me, that topic for the last 2 weeks has been Chesterton's fence. Now, I recently heard Michael Malice on the Babylon Bee podcast say,
I think Chesterton's fence is, without exaggeration, the best defense of conservatism there is.
There's nothing here that Mr. Malice says that I really disagree with, but something I've noticed as I've been going down these various rabbit holes, exploring the concept of Chesterton's fence, is how seldom the person talking about the concept will really go back to the original source material in which Chesterton introduces the idea, because when Chesterton uses a metaphor or an idea, he's often using it in the service of a point he's trying to make. And so what I want to do in this video is first just explain to you in my own mind what Chesterton's fence is getting at, and then I actually want to read the short mini essay Chesterton wrote where he introduces this idea and kind of just reflect a little bit and provide some commentary on what he was saying. So let me begin now by just explaining what I understand Chesterton's fence to be. Imagine you're walking in a field and you find a fence and you don't really know why that fence was built. And the more you try to figure out the reasoning behind the building of this fence, the more strange its placement seems to you. And it almost seems so mysterious that you just can't see a reason for the fence being here. So you then conclude, well, since I can't see a reason for this fence being here, we should get rid of it, we should tear it down, we should remove it. And basically, the less you know about the reasons why that fence is there, the more reasons you have not to remove it. The more mysterious that structure seems to you, the more cautious you should be in any move to get rid of it. This is the basic idea. Now, you could summarize it as, don't tear down a wall until you know why it was built in the first place. Don't tear down a fence until you know why it was put up in the first place. Speaking briefly as to my background in corporate training, I will often tell new managers, junior managers, that the moment you get a position as a manager, really what you do not want to do is immediately begin removing policies and procedures. And if there is a policy or a procedure in your workplace that does not make sense to you, despite your efforts, it seems mysterious to you why this policy is in place, you should absolutely not get rid of that policy or that procedure precisely because it seems mysterious and strange to you. So you can replace the fence with really any kind of traditional idea, policy, procedure, etc. And so it's not saying that you can never take down or remove that policy, but you first need to understand why it was put into place before you begin to make that move. So here I want to go to the mini essay, which is a chapter in a book called The Thing that Chesterton wrote, and it's really a collection of essays. And the essay that we find Chesterton's fence in is called The Drift from Domesticity. As we read through this essay, and I'm not going to just read it once, I'll read it and provide commentary as we go, I will reveal to you the point at which he shifts, the point at which he then takes the analogy or the idea of Chesterton's fence and he uses it to point out the point he's trying to make. So, let's begin. In the matter of reforming things as distinct from deforming them, there is one plain and simple principle. And so he views Chesterton's fence as a principle. This is the first point I should make. A principle which will probably be called a paradox. There exists in such a case a certain institution or law, let us say for the sake of simplicity, of simplicity, a fence or a gate erected across a road. So he's talking about institutions or laws in this case, right? But he's using the fence as a sort of metaphor for those institutions and laws. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, I don't see the use of this fence. Let us clear it away. To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, quote, if you do not see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then, when you can come back and tell me that you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it. So the first point here is that Chesterton's not saying that you can't tear down a form of policy, institution, law, or idea ever. He's just saying that you have to understand the reason it was put into place before you want to make that move. Great. Then Chesterton says, this paradox rests on the most elementary common sense. And now a common title for Chesterton is the Apostle of Common Sense. There's even a TV show made about him, which that is the name of the show, the Apostle of Common Sense. And so he's pointing out that this paradox, this idea, really does rest on common sense. Let's go on. The gate or the fence did not grow there. It was not set up by somnambulists who built it in their sleep. So if you don't know that word, a somnambulist is basically a sleepwalker, somebody who walks in their sleep. And he's saying it's not that they just built it, while they were sleeping, which is quite a funny image. It is highly improbable that it was put there by escaped lunatics who were for some reason loose on the street. Some person had some reason for thinking it would be a good thing to somebody. And until we know what the reason was, we really cannot judge whether the reason was reasonable. It is extremely probable that we have overlooked some whole aspect of the question. If something set up by human beings like ourselves seems to be entirely meaningless and mysterious. So it's more likely that we've missed something. Now, Chesterton's going to bring up an objection to Chesterton's fence that sometimes I will hear people in the videos I've watched raise, right? They'll bring up this objection. Now, Chesterton actually addresses it in the source material, but again, if you're not going back and you're not reading the source material, you wouldn't know that he's already addressing this very common objection to his principle. So, let's read the objection. There are reformers who get over this difficulty by assuming that all their fathers were fools. So what's he saying? Well, he's saying that some people think, well, the people who built this fence must have just been fools. They must have been idiots. And so we can safely presume that whatever reason they had for building it initially was mistaken. And you could apply this again to institutions or laws. Maybe there is a policy or a procedure in the company, and you think, well, the people who put this up before me, they were just fools. They were just idiots. Clearly, this is incorrect. Clearly, this is wrong. Now, I really love Chesterton's answer to this objection because he answers it in his just trademark wit and sort of with a tongue-in-cheek response, right? So I'll read it again, and then I'll read you the answer he gives. He says, there are reformers who get over this difficulty by assuming that all their fathers were fools. But if that be so, we can only say that folly appears to be a hereditary disease. Okay, this is very clever because he's basically saying that, okay, you're assuming it was your father's, but we can just assume that folly, that mistakenness, what makes you think that you're exempt from that same foolishness, that same folly? And so he's saying it's hereditary. You've probably inherited the same foolishness you think you're ascribing to them and excusing yourself from. Well, it's hereditary. You have it as well, hence the need to be careful, right? Hence the need to proceed with caution. Then Chesterton goes on to say, but the truth is that nobody has any business to destroy a social institution until he has really seen it as a historical institution. If he knows how it arose and what purposes it was supposed to serve, he may really be able to say that there were bad purposes, or that they have since become bad purposes, or that they are purposes which are no longer served. So very important here, right? He's saying that perhaps the purpose it was originally built for was a bad purpose, or perhaps it was originally a good purpose, but now due to the development of things, we've realized that the purpose was really quite bad. But what he's saying here is, what does that mean? Well, you have to see it not just as a social institution. You have to look at it historically. You've got to look at it as a historical institution. You've got to consider its place within history and the reasons it was built at that time. And then perhaps, if you understand that, you can then begin to think about, does this still apply to us today? But if he simply stares at the thing as a senseless monstrosity that has somehow sprung up in his path, it is he and not the traditionalist who is suffering from an illusion, right? Because he thinks it just sprung up out of nowhere. That's the illusion. Realizing that this institution or law or policy was put into place as a historical point. It's very important. We might even say that he is seeing things in a nightmare. This principle applies to 1,000 things, to trifles as well as true institutions, to convention as well as to conviction. It was exactly the sort of person like Joan of Arc, who did know why women wore skirts, who was most justified in not wearing one. Again, he's trying to make the point here, she understood the historical reason for skirts being worn, and because she knew why the fence was there, in this case skirts, she had more reasonability in denying it. He gives another example. It was exactly the sort of person like St. Francis who did sympathize with the feast and the fireside, who was most entitled to become a beggar on the open road. And when, Chesterton goes on, in the general emancipation of modern society, the Duchess says she does not see why she shouldn't play leapfrog, or the Dean declares that he sees no valid canonical reasons why he should not stand on his head, we may say to these persons with patient benevolence, defer therefore the operation you contemplate until you have realized by ripe reflection what principle or prejudice you are violating, then play leapfrog and stand on your head, and the Lord be with you. Again, he's just making the same point over and over again to try and make it clear to the reader that it's really just about understanding why these institutions are in place and having that ripe reflection before you engage in any kind of serious change. Now, this is the point in the essay where Chesterton shifts, and you realize that the whole reason he's bringing up this principle of the fence is because he wants to talk about, as is the title of this chapter, the drift from domesticity. He wants to talk about the family and our drift away from the family. So the institution, the fence that Chesterton is going to reference, is the family. Don't tear down the family until you know why it was initially put up. And I think that Chesterton's description of the family it is my favorite, and I think the most beautiful description of what the family is. So be sure to listen for that. It's so fascinating. Chesterton says, among the traditions that are being thus attacked, not intelligently, but most unintelligently, is the fundamental human creation called the household or the home. You think this is a modern problem where people are attacking the household and the home? Chesterton was writing about this 100 years ago, right? So beyond his time. That is a typical thing which men attack, Chesterton goes on, not because they can see through it, but because they cannot see it at all. And this is a point he's going to reflect on a few times, right? The reality of some of these institutions is so obviously, or the benefits of these institutions are so obviously good, that sometimes it's too obvious that we actually don't see them. We're like fish in water, right? We don't see the water. We don't see the benefits because they're just so close to us. You'll see he's going to elaborate on that quite a bit. That is a typical thing which men attack, not because they can see through it, but because they cannot see it at all. They beat at it blindly, in a fashion entirely haphazard and opportunist, and many of them would pull it down without even pausing to ask why it was ever put up. It is true that only a few of them would have avowed this object in so many words. That only proves how very blind and blundering they are. But they have fallen into a habit of mere drift and gradual detachment from family life, something that is often merely accidental and devoid of any definite theory of all. right? So this opposite of family life, this opposite of the household and the home, Chesterton says that it's of that place that you end up in is really often either accidental or it's just devoid of any real substance at all. But though, Chesterton goes on, but though it is accidental, it is nonetheless anarchical, and it is all the more anarchical for not being anarchist. It seems to be largely founded on individual irritation, an irritation which varies with the individual, this frustration with the family, with the household, with the home. We are merely told, he goes on, that it is in this or that case a particular temperament was tormented by a particular environment, but nobody explained how the evil arose, let alone whether the evil is really escaped. We are told that in this or that family, grandmama talked a great deal of nonsense, which God knows is true, or that it's very difficult to have intimate intellectual relations with Uncle Gregory without telling Uncle Gregory that he is a fool, which is also indeed the case. So what's he doing here, right? He's listing the issues we have with family, right? We've got the grandmother who talks a lot of nonsense. We've got the uncle who doesn't want to have any serious conversations with us. He's listing issues with families, right? And he says, we all consider these points, but then he says, but nobody seriously considers the remedy or even the malady, or whether the existing individualistic disillusion is a remedy at all. He's saying, we're not even really considering whether dissolving the family is actually a solution to our problem, because again, Chesterton's Fence, we don't understand the problem. We don't even consider, what did he say? The malady. We don't consider, along with the malady, the remedy. So it's not that we don't know the solution, it's that we don't know the problem. We're not aware of the problem. Then Chesterton goes on to say the following: much of this business began with the influence of Ibsen, a very powerful dramatist and an exceedingly feeble philosopher. So he's a great dramatist, but not a great philosopher. I suppose that Nora of the Doll's House, which is one of Ibsen's poems, by the way, was intended to be an inconsequent person, but certainly her most inconsequent action was her last. She complained that she was not yet fit to look after children, and then proceeded to get as far as possible from the children that she might study them more closely. There is one simple test and type of this neglect of scientific thinking and the sense of a social rule, the neglect which has now left us with nothing but a welter of exceptions. So we don't consider the norm anymore, right? We're just focusing on the exceptions. He writes, I have read hundreds and thousands of times in all the novels and newspapers of our epoch certain phrases about the just right of the young to liberty, about the unjust claim of the elders to control, about the conception that all souls must be free or all citizens equal, about the absurdity of authority or the degradation of obedience. I am not arguing those matters directly at the moment, but what strikes me as astounding in a logical sense is that not one of these myriad novelists and newspaper men ever seems to think of asking the next and most obvious question. It seems to occur to them to inquire what becomes of the opposite obligation, what happens when we actually abandon and dissolve the family, but they don't ask the question, if the child is free from the first to disregard the parent, why is not the parent free from the first to disregard the child? If Mr. Jones Sr. and Mr. Jones Jr. are only two free and equal citizens, why should one citizen sponge on another citizen for the first 15 years of his life? Why should the elder Mr. Jones be expected to feed, clothe, and shelter out of his own pocket another person who is entirely free of any obligations to him? Of course, this is what we do in the family, right? But Chesterton's saying if we dissolve the family, what is the expectation on parents to look after their children? Right? If there is no unit as the family, why even place this demand on one free individual citizen to look after another free individual citizen? If the bright young thing cannot be asked to tolerate her grandmother, who has become something of a bore, why should the grandmother or the mother have tolerated the bright young thing at a period of her life when she was by no means bright? Why did they laboriously look after her at a time when her contributions to the conversation were seldom epigrammatic and not often intelligible? He's just making the same point, right? Which is, again, that point about, why should one free citizen be forced to look after another free citizen? Why should one free citizen care to entertain the unintelligible ideas of a young child if it's just another free citizen? Why, Chesterton goes on, why should Jones Sr. stand drinks and free meals to anybody so unpleasant as Jones Jr., especially in the immature phases of his existence? Why should he not throw the baby out of the window, or at any rate kick the boy out of doors? It is obvious that we are dealing with a real relationship, which may be equality, but is certainly not similarity. So the relationships within the family are not similar, right? That the father is different from the son, the mother is different from the father is different from the daughter. But there's a real equality within the family that you don't get that real equality in other places, and he's going to go into that now. Now, some social reformers try to evade this difficulty, I know, by some vague notions about the state, or an abstraction called education, eliminating the parental function. Well, parents don't have to look after the kids. The state will do that. Education will handle the teaching to the children. And this is the objection, right? So Chesterton is going to now talk about this objection. He says, but this, like many notions of solid scientific persons, is a wild illusion of the nature of mere moonshine. It is based on that strange new superstition, the idea of infinite resources of organization. It is as if officials grew like grass or bred like rabbits. There is supposed to be an endless supply of salaried persons and of salaries for them, and they are to undertake all that human beings naturally do for themselves. Okay, this is such an important point. We already do these things for our children, and now we have to outsource that to the state. We have to outsource that to another party, right? He says, for example, the care of children. But men cannot live by taking in each other's baby linen. They cannot provide a tutor for each citizen. Who is to tutor the tutors? Men cannot be educated by machinery, and though there might be a robot bricklayer or scavenger, there will never be a robot schoolmaster or governess. The actual effect of this theory is that one harassed person has to look after 100 children, which is the state that most schools are in right now, right? Instead of one normal person looking after a normal number of them. Normally, that normal person is urged by a natural force which costs nothing and does not require a salary. What is he talking about? Parents. Mothers, fathers. I'll read that again to make that point clear. Normally, that normal person who looks after the children is urged by a natural force, which costs nothing and does not require a salary. The force of, what is the force? Natural affection for his or her young, which exists even among the animals. If you cut off that natural force and substitute it with a paid bureaucracy, like the state, you are like a fool who should pay men to turn the wheel of his mill because he refused to use wind or water which he could get for nothing. I love this next line. You are like a lunatic who should carefully water his garden with a watering can while holding up an umbrella to keep off the rain. Remember the point he made earlier, right, about how we're so obsessed with exceptions that we create standards which apply to everybody, all the families, to address the exceptions of children who don't have parents, which is obviously tragic, right? But here you have a situation where he's talking about the fact that there is already a natural force of affection and a desire to look after and educate and tolerate our young because we love them. And now to assume that because of the exceptions we have to outsource that free resource of love, it's like standing in the rain with an umbrella while watering your plants. Like, the resource is there, it's prevalent, it's available, and yet we want to outsource it. It is now necessary to recite these truisms, Chesterton goes on, for only by doing so can we begin to get a glimpse of that reason for the existence of the family. By the way, that point I made earlier where I said that Chesterton's description of the family is one of the most beautiful I've ever heard, that's about to come. It's coming soon. He says we have to now explain the reason for the family, which I began this essay by demanding. They were all familiar to our fathers who believed in the links of kinship and also in the links of logic. Today our logic consists mostly of missing links and our family largely of absent members. But anyhow, this is the right end at which to begin any such inquiry, and not at the tail end of some private muddle by which Dick has become discontented or Susan has gone off on her own. If Dick or Susan wish to destroy the family because they do not see the use of it, I say, as I said in the beginning, if they do not see the use of it, they had much better preserve it. They have no business even to think of destroying it until they have seen the use of it. Chesterton's Fence coming up again, right? Oh, I don't see the purposes of family. Family in my own situation is just proven useless. We should destroy the concept of family. Chesterton's Fence. The fact that you don't understand it is exactly why you should not want to be destroying it. Okay, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful writing. Chesterton then says, but it has other uses. Besides the obvious fact that it means a necessary social work being done for love when it cannot be done for money, and one might also dare to hint, presumably to be repaid with love, since it is never repaid in money. There's the long-term exchange of love that comes from looking after your children. And remember, he does says, one almost dare to hint, right? So he's not saying that's guaranteed. It's never guaranteed, but it's a dare we can have. It's a hint we can have. On that simple side of the matter, the general situation is easy to record. The existing and general system of society, subject in our own age and industrial culture to very gross abuses and painful problems, is nevertheless a normal one. Here we go. Here is Chesterton's explanation of what the family is, and I love it. It's so poetic. Give this a listen. Family is the idea that the commonwealth, all of us, is made up of a number of small kingdoms, of which a man and a woman become the king and queen, and in which they exercise a reasonable authority, subject to the common sense of the commonwealth, until those under their care grow up to found similar kingdoms and exercise similar authority. This is the social structure of mankind, far older than all its records and more universal than any of its religions, and all attempts to alter it are mere talk and tomfoolery. Genius. Beautiful. Whew. Bringing a tear to my eye here. But the other advantage of the small group is now not so much neglected as simply not realized. The other advantage of family is not even that it's neglected, is that we don't even see it, we don't even realize it, and this is what he's going to explore next. Here again we have some extraordinary delusions spread all over the literature and journalism of our time too. Those delusions now exist in such a degree that we may say for all practical purposes that when a thing has been stated about 1,000 times as obviously true, it is almost certain to be obviously false. One such statement may be specially noted here. There is undoubtedly something to be said against domesticity and in favor of the general drift towards life in hotels, clubs, colleges, communal settlements, and the rest, or for a social life organized on the plan of the great commercial systems of our time. But the truly extraordinary suggestion is often made that this escape from the home is an escape into greater freedom. The change is actually offered as favorable to liberty. Now, this is the point that Chesterton is going to explore until we get to the end of his essay. This idea that leaving the family that abolishing the family really leads to greater freedom and greater liberty. Chesterton is going to take this apart. Let's go on. To anybody who can think, of course, it is exactly the opposite. The domestic division of human society is not perfect, being human. He says that, right? The domestic division of human society is not perfect, being human. It does not achieve complete liberty, a thing somewhat difficult to do or even difficult to define. But it is a mere matter of arithmetic that it puts a larger number of people in supreme control of something and able to shape it to their personal liking than do the vast organizations that rule society outside, whether those systems are legal or commercial or even merely social. Even if we were only considering the parents, it is plain that there are more parents than there are policemen or politicians or heads of big businesses or proprietors or hotels. As I shall suggest in a moment, the argument actually applies indirectly to the children as well as directly to the parents. But the main point is that, here's the main point, the world outside the home is now under a rigid discipline and routine, and it is only inside the home that there is really a place for individuality and liberty. Going right against this idea that abolishing the family leads to more liberty and freedom, right? That it's outside the world, things are becoming so regimented, so controlled, that really the only place you're going to find comfort is your home. Let's go on. We're approaching the end now of this essay. This is so great, right? I love Chesterton. Stepping out. Some of the guys who watch my channel regularly are going to roast me alive in the comments because I'm always like falling in love as I read Chesterton, and I can't help myself, right? So apologies in advance. Stepping out of the front door. Okay, let's go here. Okay. Anyone stepping out of the front door, Chesterton goes on, is obliged to step into a procession, all going the same way and to a great extent even obliged to wear the same uniform. Talking about life outside of the home. Business, especially big business, is now organized like an army. It is, as some would say, a sort of mild militarism without bloodshed. As I should say, a militarism without the military virtues. But anyhow, it is obvious that 100 clerks in a bank or 100 waitresses in a tea shop are more regimented and under rule than the same individuals, those same waitresses, those same clerks in the bank. They're more regimented and under rule at work than those same people when each has gone back to his or her own dwelling and her own lodging, hung with their own favorite pictures, with their own fragrant smells, and their own favorite cheap cigarettes, he says. But this, which is so obvious in the commercial case, is no less true even in the social case. In practice, the pursuit of pleasure is merely the pursuit of fashion. The pursuit of fashion is merely the pursuit of convention, of trying to follow with the times, only that it happens to be a new convention. The jazz dances, the joy rides, the big pleasure parties and hotel entertainments do not make any more provision for a really independent taste than did any of the fashions of the past. If a wealthy young lady wants to do what all the other wealthy young ladies are doing, she will find it great fun simply because youth is fun and society is fun. She will enjoy being modern exactly as her Victorian grandmother enjoyed being Victorian, and quite right too. But it is the enjoyment of convention, not the enjoyment of liberty. It's the enjoyment of going along with the fads. It's not the enjoyment of pure liberty. This is his point, right? It's such a great point. It is perfectly healthy for all young people of all historic periods to herd together to a reasonable extent and enthusiastically copy each other. But in that there is nothing particularly fresh and certainly nothing particularly free. The girl who likes shaving her head and powdering her nose and wearing short skirts will find the world organized for her and will march happily with the procession. But a girl who happened to like having her hair down to her heels, or loading herself with barbaric gauds and trailing garments, or, most awful of all, leaving her nose in its natural state, she will still be well advised to do these things under her own premises. If the Duchess does not want to play leapfrog, she must not start suddenly leaping in the manner of a frog across the ballroom of the Babylon Hotel when it is crowded with the 50 best couples professionally practicing the very latest dance. He's making the same point here, right, over and over again. That freedom you think is out there, it's not true liberty. Right? It's convention, it's structure, it's very much going to tell you how to behave. Then, Chesterton goes on, he says, the Duchess will find it easier to practice leapfrog to the admiration of her intimate friends in the old oak-panelled hall of Fitzdragon Castle, again talking about the home. If the Dean must stand on his head, he will do it with more ease and grace in the calm atmosphere of the deanery than by attempting to interrupt the program of some social entertainment already organized for philanthropic purposes. If there is this impersonal routine in commercial and even in social things, it goes without saying that it exists and always must exist in political and legal things. If it's in the social, it's going to be in the political, it's going to be in the legal. This impersonal routine is what he's talking about. Chesterton goes on, it is only the punishments of the home that can possibly be adapted to the individual case. Because it is only there that the judge can know anything of the individual. If Tommy takes a silver thimble out of a work basket, his mother may act very differently according as she knows that he did it for fun or for spite or to sell to somebody or to get somebody into trouble. But if Tompkins takes a silver thimble out of a shop, the law not only can, but must punish him according to the rule made for all shoplifters or stealers of silver. It is only the domestic discipline that can show any sympathy or especially any humor. I'll read that point again because it's so important. It is only the domestic discipline, the home, that can show any sympathy or especially humor. In this case, I do not say that the family always does do this. Okay, so here Chesterton's making a point, right? He's not saying this always happens. The family doesn't always do this. However, listen to what he says here. I do not say that the family always does do this, but I say that the state never ought to attempt it. State shouldn't even try to do it. So that even if we consider the parents alone as independent princes and the children merely as subjects, the relative freedom of the family can and often does work to the advantage of those subjects. But so long as the children are children, they will always be the subjects of somebody. The question is whether they are to be distributed naturally under their natural princes, as the old phrase went, who normally feel for them what nobody else will, a natural affection. It seems to me clear that this normal distribution gives the largest amount of liberty to the largest number of people. Making his point again, but now he's hammering it home, right? And we're right at the end. Chesterton begins to conclude this marvelous chapter. He says, my complaint of the anti-domestic drift is that it is unintelligent. People do not know what they are doing because they do not know what they are undoing. There are a multitude of modern manifestations, from the largest to the smallest, ranging from a divorce to a picnic party. But each is a separate escape or evasion, and especially an evasion of the point at issue. People ought to decide in a philosophical fashion whether they desire the traditional social order or not, or if there is any particular alternative to be desired, as they treat the public question merely as a mess or medley of private questions. Even in being anti-domestic, they are much too domestic in their test of domesticity. Each family considers only its own case, and the result is merely narrow and negative. Each case is an exception to a rule that does not exist. The family, especially in the modern state, stands in need of considerable correction and reconstruction. I'll read that again. The family, especially in the modern state, stands in need of considerable correction and reconstruction. Most things do in the modern state. But the family mansion should be preserved or destroyed or rebuilt. It should not be allowed to fall to pieces brick by brick because nobody has any historic sense of the object of bricklaying. For instance, the architect of the Restoration should rebuild the house with wide and easily opened doors for the practice of the ancient virtue of hospitality. In other words, private property should be distributed with sufficiently decent equality to allow of a margin for festive intercourse. But the hospitality of a house will always be different from the hospitality of a hotel, and it will be different in being more individual, more independent, more interesting than the hospitality of a hotel. It is perfectly right that the young Browns and the young Robinsons should meet and mix and dance and make asses of themselves, according to the design of their creator. But there will always be some difference between the Browns entertaining the Robinsons and the Robinsons entertaining the Browns. And it will be a difference to the advantage of variety, of personality, of the potentialities of the mind of man, or, in other words, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What can I say? Brilliant, genius, beautiful. I feel better. I feel, revivified after reading that. Yeah, so I wanted to do this just so that the source material of Chesterton's Fence is out here in the interwebs, because as people Google it and people search it, I feel that they're getting tiny little snippets of what Chesterton's saying, but I don't think you can really get any clearer than the own source material. I'm sure there's somebody out there who's summarized it very well, and there are plenty of summaries, but as you guys know, if you watch my channel, I like to get stuck in the weeds. That's why I do these kind of, literally reading the sentences word by word. But anyway, guys, this has been The Drift from Domesticity by Chesterton. It's in his book, The Thing, which I highly recommend checking out. It's a great book. If you did enjoy this, these are all the logistics I got to cover, right? If you did enjoy this video, please click that. I don't want to say click gently without harming it too badly, that like button, and subscribe so that you get more content like this appearing in your feed. It helps the channel grow. It helps this kind of content get to more people. It's good for the algorithm and all the rest. All that stuff. And let me know what you thought of this, right? Let me know in the comments. I'm not like a Chesterton purist, right? I'm happy to admit if he says something that I think is wrong, I'm not going to just agree because it's Chesterton, right? So I think you gotta take things with a grain of salt, and you've gotta really think about the good and the bad of what a person's saying. But honestly, for me, this is a fantastic breakdown of the importance of the family, and dare I say it might be the best I've ever heard. So let me know what you think. Give me your feedback, your comments, your complaints, criticisms, all the rest. Let me know down in the comments. And yes, if you'd like to watch a video where I interview somebody and we actually talk about, I talk to the president of the G.K. Chesterton Society in America, which is a fantastic interview because he's so well read on Chesterton. You can actually watch that video by clicking over here. And then if you'd like to watch a video I did recently, which is a commentary on RFK Jr.'s response to Lex Friedman on the question of God, you can click here. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Dylan Khoos. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.